When I was about 10 years old, my best friend Ron invited me over for a sleepover. We had been planning it for weeks. Video games, pizza, the typical stuff. I excitedly packed my stuff and arrived at his house right after sunset. Ron's house was different. Unlike my modern suburban home, his was a century-old farmhouse, complete with creaky floors and those old-style narrow windows. Its charm was part of why I loved spending time there, but it also held a certain eeriness. After a few hours of gaming, Ron suggested we sneak into the attic. "It's haunted," he whispered, a mischievous glint in his eyes. I laughed it off, but agreed. The idea was thrilling, even if I didn't believe in ghosts. Up we went, armed with nothing but a small flashlight. The dim beam danced on the wooden walls, revealing dust-covered trinkets and forgotten family portraits. As we explored, Ron began to share a family story I hadn't heard before. "My great-grandma used to tell my dad about a shadow creature," he began, his voice low. "She said it was trapped here by an old relative, a sort of guardian of the house." The light-hearted atmosphere had dissipated. "Why would they trap it here?" I questioned. Ron looked uneasy. "To protect something, but nobody knows what." Suddenly, our light flickered out. Panic surged. Ron frantically tried to turn it back on, but it was dead. We stood there in the inky blackness, feeling suddenly very vulnerable. And that's when I felt it. A cold draft on my neck, as if someone was breathing down it. Ron must have felt it too, because he whispered, "We need to go. Now." But as we turned to leave, a dark shadow, darker than the surroundings, blocked our path. It wasn't solid, more like a wisp of smoke, but it had a definite form, vaguely human, but not quite. Frozen in place, we watched as it shifted and writhed, growing larger. An overwhelming sense of dread filled the attic. The air grew colder, thick with tension. The shadow seemed to be feeding off our fear. I remembered something my grandmother used to say about facing your fears, and in that moment, with adrenaline pumping through my veins, I stepped forward, shouting, "Leave us alone!" To my astonishment, the shadow hesitated, but it didn't vanish. Instead, it shrunk back, forming into a more compact shape, hovering in midair. "We need to leave," Ron whispered again, clutching my arm. Without another word, we bolted, not looking back, racing down the attic stairs and into the warmth of the house. We slammed the attic door shut, panting heavily. "We need to lock it," I said, and we did, using a heavy metal bar that lay nearby. Trying to process what had happened, we went back to Ron's room, avoiding the questions from his parents about our pale faces. We didn't speak of the shadow creature for a while, trying to convince ourselves it was just our imagination playing tricks on us. But deep down, we both knew what we'd seen. Curiosity, however, is a powerful motivator. A few days later, Ron told me he had been doing some research. He discovered that his great-great-grandfather had been a renowned occultist. He had dabbled in dark arts and was rumored to have trapped a shadow creature to guard some powerful artifact. The artifact's nature was unclear, but it was hidden somewhere in the house, hence the creature's presence. Ron was determined to find this artifact and free the creature. "It's not right," he said. "It's been trapped for too long." Reluctantly, I agreed to help. Armed with knowledge and a determination to face our fears, we went back to the attic a week later. This time during the day. It was there, behind a false wall. We found a small chest. It was decorated with symbols that seemed both ancient and eerie. As Ron opened it, we found a small crystal amulet, shimmering even in the dim light. Remembering what he had read, Ron recited an incantation to free the shadow creature. As he did, the room grew dark, and that familiar cold draft enveloped us. But this time there was a sense of gratitude. The shadow appeared once more, hovering near the amulet. But instead of the evil presence we felt before, it now seemed at peace. It circled the amulet a few times, then with a swift motion, merged with it, causing the crystal to glow even brighter. And just like that, it was gone. The atmosphere in the attic felt lighter. We carefully placed the amulet back in the chest and hid it where we found it, deciding it was best left undisturbed. Ron's house felt different after that. The eeriness was gone, replaced by a calm serenity. We never saw the shadow creature again, and as the years passed, our terrifying encounter became a distant memory, occasionally retold at gatherings for the thrill of it. But one thing remained clear. That night changed our perception of the unknown. We had faced our fears, confronted a dark presence, and in the end perhaps set something right that had been wrong for a very long time. When I was a teenager, my parents' friends, the Howards, went on a 2-week vacation and asked me to house sit for them. I was thrilled. Their house was massive, nestled at the end of a long, winding driveway and surrounded by thick woods. It was an ideal setting for a teen who wanted some alone time. Plus, they had a giant TV, which pleased me. I was looking forward to binging my favorite shows without any interruptions. The first day went by without a hitch. I took a dip in their pool, made myself some sandwiches, and lounged around like a king. The darkness set in quickly, and as the night grew deeper, the house's vastness began to feel isolating. Around midnight, as I was curled up on the couch watching a scary movie, ironically, I heard a noise upstairs. It sounded like a soft shuffling. Assuming it was just the house settling, I shrugged it off and continued watching. But then, the shuffling became louder, deliberate. It seemed like something was moving about. My mind began to race. Had the Howards forgotten to mention a pet, or was someone trying to break in? I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and tiptoed up the stairs. Each step creaked under my weight, echoing in the silent house. The noise was coming from the master bedroom. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the door. Taking a deep breath, I flung it open. To my relief, the room was empty. I chuckled to myself, thinking I'd let my imagination run wild because of the movie. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed it, a tall, dark shadow leaning against the far corner of the room. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. Maybe the dim light from the street lamp was casting strange shadows. But as I turned to leave the room, I felt a sudden drop in temperature, and an oppressive weight filled the air. I felt like I was being watched. I made my way downstairs, feeling the prickle of unease on the back of my neck. The living room lights flickered, then went out completely, plunging me into darkness. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. Reaching for my phone's light, I caught a glimpse of the shadow in its beam. It was humanoid but lacked any defining features. It was just darkness, an absence of light. The light flickered, then died, leaving me once again in the pitch black. The ambient noise of the night outside vanished. There was just silence, not even the hum of appliances. A sensation of dread washed over me as I realized that the shadow wasn't just in the house, it was everywhere. It seemed like the house was alive, breathing with this malevolent entity. I could feel it close by, but couldn't see anything. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but fear had paralyzed me. A cold breath brushed against my ear, and I heard a voice, a whisper so faint yet so chilling. "You're not alone." Without a second thought, I bolted for the front door. But the door wouldn't budge. It felt like it was sealed shut by an unseen force. Panic gripped me. I made a dash for the nearest window, but as I approached, I saw the shadow looming outside, staring back at me, if it could be said to stare without eyes. Every exit seemed blocked. The house had become a trap. Feeling trapped and terrified, I decided to confront it. Turning around, I yelled, "What do you want?" The air grew even colder, and the oppressiveness became almost suffocating. The shadow began to solidify, taking on a more tangible form. It was tall, menacing, and its very presence seemed to consume the light around it. In a last-ditch attempt, I remembered the Howards had a basement with an old storm door leading outside. Without hesitating, I dashed to the basement, the shadow on my heels. The door was rusted, but with sheer adrenaline-driven strength, I managed to force it open and fell outside. Gasping for air, I looked around. The surroundings seemed familiar yet different. The dense forest had receded, replaced by a sprawling field bathed in moonlight. The house was nowhere in sight. Instead, there was just an old abandoned well. Confused and disoriented, I began to walk, hoping to find a road or some sign of civilization. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon our small town. But something was off. The houses were dilapidated and there were no signs of life. Making my way to my own home, I tried to open the door but found it locked. Peering through a window, I saw my parents and a younger version of myself sitting at the table, laughing and talking. A cold realization dawned upon me. The shadow entity hadn't trapped me in the house. It had trapped me in time. To this day, I don't know how I found my way back to my time, back to reality. The shadow's realm was like a maze, a twisted version of my world. But after what felt like forever, I woke up outside the house, the morning sun warming my face. I never house sat again, but every time I pass a shadow, every dark corner or dimly lit room, I'm reminded of that night.
It was a time of change in my life. After dating Amanda for a few months, things got serious. So when she suggested that I move into her condo in the heart of the city, it seemed like the perfect next step. I remember the feeling of excitement as I lugged my boxes into her place. The condo was spacious, but what caught my attention most were the large windows that lined the living room, providing a breathtaking view of the skyline. The first couple of weeks felt like a honeymoon phase. We cooked together, watched movies, and shared countless stories. But then things started to change. It began subtly. There were moments, often in the dead of night, when I'd feel a chill, even with the heat turned up. Or there'd be a faint tapping on the windows, though we were several floors up with no possible source of the noise. We laughed it off, blaming the city's quirks. One evening, while we were sharing a bottle of wine, Amanda's face turned ashen. Following her gaze, I saw a fleeting shadow darting past the window. But when I rushed to see, there was nothing. "Must have been a bird," I reassured her. But her eyes said she didn't believe it. Things escalated. One night we heard whispers, hushed but clear, coming from the other room. We searched the condo, thinking someone had broken in. Empty. Yet, the whispering continued. We barely slept that night, clutching onto each other tightly. Then came the appearance of the shadow people. Out of the corners of our eyes, we'd see humanoid figures. They'd be there for a fraction of a second and then disappear. But their presence was palpable, the air growing heavy and cold when they were near. One evening, after a particularly disturbing encounter with the shadows, Amanda broke down. "It started before you moved in," she whispered, tears streaming down. "But it was so infrequent. I thought I was imagining things. I thought it might stop if someone else was here." The terror in her voice broke my heart. Why hadn't she told me earlier? Desperate for answers, we consulted a local psychic. The woman, a wrinkled soul with piercing eyes, stepped into our condo and instantly seemed uncomfortable. "There's a powerful entity here," she whispered. "A spirit, and it's attached to someone. Sometimes spirits latch onto people. From the looks of it, this one is deeply infatuated, or obsessed might be a better word. Jealous of your relationship." With every word she spoke, the room grew colder. The psychic went on to explain that the spirit might have been someone Amanda knew, or someone from the building's history. Either way, it had taken a liking to her and saw me as a threat. The thought of an ethereal being harboring feelings for Amanda and expressing them through these terrifying manifestations was horrifying. The psychic tried to cleanse the condo, but whatever was there resisted. It seemed that the more we tried to fight it, the stronger and more aggressive it became. The last straw was when I woke up one night paralyzed, feeling an icy hand gripping my neck. As I gasped for air, I could see, even in the dim light, the silhouette of a man leaning over Amanda, caressing her face. I tried to scream, to move, but I was helpless. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The grip on my neck released, and the shadowy figure vanished. That morning, I packed my things. I knew I couldn't stay. If the spirit saw me as the barrier to its infatuation with Amanda, perhaps my leaving would give her some peace. Amanda begged me to stay, tears in her eyes, but I could see the relief in her gaze. We both knew it was the best decision. We broke up shortly after. The memories of those terrifying nights were too raw, too painful. I moved to a new city, trying to forget the faceless entity that had driven a wedge between us. To this day, I wonder about that spirit, about its history, and why it was so attached to Amanda. Did it leave her alone after I left, or did it remain an ever-present shadow in her life? I'll never know, and perhaps that's for the best.